Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. This is episode 141. And first, right off the bat, welcome to all the new listeners. Last week's show did very well, and I'm so happy and hopeful that a lot of you are sticking around for what's next for the Podcast Digest. If you missed it for some reason, episode 140 featured Michael Ian Black from How to Be Amazing. Great conversation. Amazing, if I dare say. But this week lives up to the exact same standard. Another return guest, someone I was so excited to catch up with. But before we get into this week's show, let me take a quick moment and thank, as I always do, the few, the proud, the Patreon supporters, those folks chipping in to support the Podcast Digest directly, people who truly love the show and love the work that I'm doing. And I cannot be more appreciative. There's a link in the show notes, folks, for Patreon if you would like to kick in as little as $1 a month to help out the Podcast Digest. Also, would like to thank this week's show sponsor. An old friend makes their return. My friends at Podbean are back again. So this week's show is brought to you by Podbean. They offer podcast hosting and monetization. It's the easiest way to start a podcast, folks. Podbean.com/TPD to learn more and get your first month for free. I'll tell you more about Podbean and some of the new stuff they got going on in just a little while. But let's get to this week's show, 141. This is another callback episode, if you will. I think I'm going with that title. We're going to go with that for now. Another callback episode to a previous guest. Tally Abecassis from First Day Back is my guest this week, and she has a brand new season 2 of her show, but it's completely different than season 1. And I wanted to talk to her about it and dig in and figure out, since the last time we spoke, what's been going on? What's changed with the show? What's been going on with her? How did all this come together for season 2? So we cover that and more. It's a great conversation, and First Day Back is an amazing show. If you're not listening to it, and I think I mentioned this in our conversation, hop right in, go all the way back to season 1, start there, and it's an awesome listen, and I think you'll love it. So let's get to my conversation right now with Tally Abecassis from First Day Back. All right, folks, welcome back. And as I mentioned up front, my guest this week is another returning guest. Again, I haven't got any great names for the returning guest series, callback series, or whatever it is. But this week, for episode 141, I am touching base once again with Tally Abecassis from First Day Back. She is out now, and season 2 is out there for your earballs. And I wanted to ask her all about what this experience has been like. So, Tally, welcome back to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. There has been a lot that has gone on since we last spoke. Episode 59, folks, back in September of 2015, which is apparently my callback month. A lot has happened. When we last spoke, season 1 was in production, and that was a completely different deal. So how you been?
I've been good. It's funny when I hear 2015, I'm like, oh my God, 2015, that was a long time ago. But yeah, it feels like a long time.
And a lot's happened, that's for sure. So let's kind of go back to that period. Let's talk about first, if we can, post season 1 life. As you wrapped up season 1, where were you? What were you thinking about the experience, the process, and what were some of the early ideas about what was next?
Well, mostly I really liked the medium. So I've been working in documentary film for a few years, and well, for almost 10 years or something. And I'd always wanted to work in radio. It's just something that I've loved for years and years. And so until podcasting, it was really hard to break into radio. So after doing season 1, I felt like I really loved doing this. I really enjoyed the process. And when was it? I think I had just finished season 1 when Mark George from Scripps in Washington reached out to me and said, what are you working on next? Like, we'd be interested in talking with you about your plans for the upcoming, for season 2. And I had said, I'm thinking about doing a season 2. So the only thing I knew is that I wanted to do something completely different, that I didn't want to only explore subjects around motherhood or have it be a podcast about work-life balance. I just felt like I want to get back into documentary, and I want to do something totally different for season 2. So Mark and I started talking and threw around some ideas, and I don't know if I should get into this part right away, but
well, let's take apart what you just mentioned there. Not long after season 1, you mentioned Scripps had reached out to you. Now, for the everyday podcast listener, they may not be familiar with who in the world Scripps is. So give them a lowdown.
A lot of people are not. Scripps is a huge media company. Everybody knows the Scripps spelling bee. They have the spelling bee, but they also they have. I don't know if they have TV stations, but they do media across all genres. And the DC bureau people have a digital wing. They have a digital group who produce podcasts. They produce a podcast called Decode DC that's a political podcast. And they were looking to get into other stuff that sort of fit their their identity. And so one of the things is they've always been into very in-depth, long-form journalism. And although I'm not a journalist, I wanted to do something over a long period of time where you sort of get to know somebody and really deep dive into it. So Scripps they're not like a brand name that everybody necessarily knows, but they're a big news and media organization. And so the people who reached out to me were in this section of Scripps in Washington.
Now, for people who were big fans of season 1, maybe just coming into season 2, somebody's going to ask this question, and I'm not digging for dirt or anything of that nature, but I'm curious. With season 1, you were a part of the herd. Now, is your working with Scripps now a different chapter for First Day Back, or is there no change, or where are we with that?
Well, the herd are like my soulmates, the people in the herd are like the people who I started podcasting with and who were there for me during every step of the early days. And we've all kind of grown in different directions, I would say. So, Jacob has paired up with Nashville Public Radio. Jonathan's gone on to a million different other projects. Marlo Mack is doing stuff with Seattle Public Radio. It's not just me. Like, we've sort of all gone in different directions, and I wouldn't say that there's any love that has changed between any of us, but we're just a little less. I mean, it was never really an official organization. Like, we're not incorporated or anything like that. It was more just we called ourselves a collective because we were just a group of people who like to hang out together. Well, even if it was online hanging out, and we liked each other's work, and so we were promoting each other. So I wouldn't say there's anything that necessarily changed, except now, Scripps is part of Stitcher, and Stitcher is an actual a company with a distribution network, and so the show now is branded. First Day Back is now branded as a Stitcher show.
And it's arguable that I would say that almost that was sort of what the herd was designed to do, right? Because I spoke with many of you during sort of the formation and first months afterwards, and a lot of the idea was to kind of help each other out as a resource, whether it be from marketing or production or whatever the case may be. Exactly. And it's almost like all ships rose type of thing.
I think it's like, a few times we've been online, like lamenting our lack of time to hang out together. Because we used to have these once a week phone calls that were Skype calls, and we would hang out on video, and it would just feel like a group of friends getting together. And once when we were lamenting, the fact that we didn't have time for it anymore, I was like, well, the good news is we don't have time for it because we're all really busy doing great things. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to ask because I bet somebody would ask. So sure. I'm glad we covered that. Okay, so let's get back onto the timeline here. So Scripps reaches out to you. You take them up on the opportunity, and you begin getting the new direction for season 2. So you talked about more of a documentary story, and it wasn't necessarily going to be yours this time. Exactly. So how did you begin the process to start to narrow in on sort of a subject for season 2?
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, it felt like a fairy tale to be reached out to and to be set, somebody to say like, hey, great, we'd like to support you and you're doing this. I mean,
that is awesome. That is awesome.
It was pretty awesome. It was very awesome. So not to say that it was very, very awesome. So we started brainstorming. It was Mark, George, and I. We started brainstorming. I came to the table with a bunch of ideas, and he basically said to me, well, let us know what you come up with. And I had already, the first time we spoke, I had already spoken to a woman who was coming out of jail. And I had said, I'm really interested in the idea of somebody having a first day back from prison, because that just seems like a really extreme version of a first day back. But I was still also, I've always wanted to do a sports story. I was still like looking for an athlete. Maybe it had an injury. I was still reaching out to military people. Like I had all these irons in the fire, but nothing exactly worked out until there was this woman coming out of prison. And so it was a completely different story from the one that I ended up with. But I started to work with this woman, and I had only done maybe 1 or 2 interviews, and then she violated her parole and she was sent back to jail. And I was completely gutted, because I felt like she really did have just a fascinating story. And there were these multiple first days back in her life. And I was so disappointed. I thought, like, okay, nothing as good as that is ever going to come up. And basically I was working with an organization that works with women prisoners, and they were interested in helping out. So they had been sending me people I make it sound like there was a lineup of people. There wasn't a lineup of people, but they were sending me, references once in a while. And so this woman, Lucy, came up, and initially I thought, well, I don't know, like she's coming out of prison for manslaughter, but she doesn't actually remember. How's she going to talk about it if she doesn't remember what happened? Like, it just seemed like, well, there was this big hole in her story. And so, well, because for people who don't know, the story of First Day Back season 2 is about a woman coming out of prison for involuntary manslaughter who accidentally killed her husband and has no memory of it. And it, like I said, initially when I heard that, I was like, oh, well, that doesn't work. But as we started talking, and she was very, very open. And as we started talking, I went like, oh my God, this is really fascinating to not have any memory of what you did. And this thing that changed your life that you don't know how it happened. It just seemed unbelievable to me.
So with these other ideas that you had on the plate, whether it be the initial woman you were speaking to coming out of prison, or some of these other ideas, sports or military, whatever the case may be, did this one that you ultimately decided to go forward with, especially, and I was going to ask that in terms of the memory, did this seem, and I know you've got a background in documentary filmmaking, so maybe not, but did this seem daunting from a storytelling standpoint? Because it sounds like it would be.
Yeah, it was completely daunting. And to be honest, in retrospect, I don't think I realized how big of a mountain it was. And in retrospect, I would have been able to do it on my own the way I did season 1, because there are a lot of things required when you're doing a story that involves a crime, like getting transcripts and getting court documents and, fact checking stuff that is not easy. Like, hats off to the serial people, because I did not appreciate all the research that has to go into it. That's very heavy. I mean, I'm not trying to be naive, but it's, just the applying for court documents and getting them. And very often they're not crazy. Well, in Canada, at least, they weren't crazy about releasing stuff to an individual. So it helped that I was part of a media organization.
Right.
But from a storytelling point of view, it definitely seemed daunting. And it's also hard, and I've done this before, but the end points usually are more finite in my film work. But when you get into a story and you just don't know where it's going, and you wonder, like, what's going to be the end? And are we going to know when there's going to be an end? Like, I'm just following this woman as she tries to get her life back. Like, at what point do we say, okay, I mean, she might not have a particular moment that feels like an end, or like, what if things go wrong? I mean, when you do something documentary like this, you just don't know. And that's part of the adventure, but it feels scary sometimes, especially when you're working with a group of people and you're theoretically driving the ship. It was daunting for sure.
And it would seem to me, and you already kind of answered some of the things I was going to ask in terms of, I guess, first of all, let me get this sense of a timeline down. because a lot of fans of season 1 are probably wondering, where have you been? I think what you're describing right now is a huge part of that answer. So when did you first decide that Working with Lucy was going to be season 2?
I first met her in November, and I think it definitely took a few weeks, and it took, I would say, 2 meetings. And some of the people in the herd helped me with that decision. Like I bounced it off them. I remember bouncing it off Rob McKinley Myers. I remember talking to Erica Heilman from Rumble Strip, Vermont, in addition to Mark. But at the time, I didn't know Mark as well as I knew these other guys. So
approximately 6+ months ago, this whole process started.
No, a year and a half.
Oh, you mean November of 15?
Yeah. November of 2015. Yeah. No, I've been following Lucy for over a year and a half. Well, just a little over a year and a half. I mean, yeah.
So when you first met her, was she at that time still in prison or was on the way out?
No, I met her just as she had arrived at the transition house where she lives now.
Got it.
Partially. Yeah.
So what was the process? You said you started with a couple of meetings. Then where did this go from here?
I started with a couple of meetings. Well, the first meeting that I had with her was really just like us feeling each other out. It wasn't recorded. It was just me telling her what I wanted to do, having her think about it too on her end. She had to decide if it was something that she wanted to do. And then we just started, like when she said yes, I just started going, and let me think of what one of the first things that happened was, well, by now people will have heard this, but she went to go buy a car in January of 2016, and I remember saying, okay, well, I'm going to come with you when you go buy your car. And so I just started following her around, recording, and we just keep in touch, and I would ask her to let me know if something was happening in her life. And she lives 2.5 hours away from me. So I couldn't just like go drop by when I was in the area. So it had to be like, it was my whole day. Like if I was going to go see her. So it was all pretty planned. And like a couple times I had to change plans for weather, stuff like that. But anyway, it just started with interviews and following her around and kind of shadowing her life a little bit. But I wasn't doing that every day. I mean, it was like I went through periods where I went to see her once a week, but then I went through like the summer of 2016, I didn't see her very much. She was busy. I was busy.
And a lot of, I'm guessing some of the early parts was you digging into the backstory.
It took a really long time for us to talk about the backstory. I really wanted to be in a place where she trusted me. And so I would say we didn't talk about it for the first few months.
Wow. So, but you were still confident you had a story.
Yeah. Because I knew, I could tell that she was very open, and that, and I had said to her, you're going to have to talk to me about this eventually. Are you okay with that? And she said yes. Okay. So I knew that she knew that it was coming, and I would say to her, like, maybe in a month or so we'll have a big talk about that. And so she knew that it was kind of on the horizon and that I hadn't forgotten about it. But she's also, I think she thinks about it so much that it wasn't a problem for her to talk about it in the end.
It was never far
she got
from
emotional.
the surface.
Yeah, she got emotional about it, but she was not scared to talk about it.
In preparing for our conversation, Tally, one of the things I read in, I think it was the AV Club's commentary, and that's something, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago when I talked to Megan Tan, a millennial. I told her, hey, the first time we spoke, I said, I put your name and show in Google, and all I found was the show, and then this time I found an article in Forbes from the day before. Same thing with you, Tally. When we last spoke, you were part of the herd, and, it was your central story. This time, I found an article in AV Club. Different world, 2017. Yeah. But one of the things they mentioned in there, and I wanted to get your take about it, because others are probably wondering this, because this has been something discussed here a lot lately. When you think about Missing Richard Simmons, or you think about a lot of the shows, of course, S-Town, there's this concept of portraying individuals in a particular light, and a lot of listeners or critics are starting to sort of question that. So in the AV Club write-up, there was, how is Tally going to sort of handle a potential sympathetic portrayal of somebody who had been convicted of involuntary manslaughter and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering, during this interview process and data collection process, when you're trying to pin down the storyline, did that thought enter your mind? And if so, how did you kind of traverse that?
It didn't, because it was an accident. So because it was an accident, I actually feel like Lucy is very relatable, because she could be anybody. Like we all engage in risky behavior. I've done stupid things and I've just gotten lucky. And she just had the worst luck ever in the world. Now, I think part of it might be that I don't know if everybody believes her, because she has this memory gap, and I think for some people that seems convenient. Right. But I've spent a lot of time with her and I believe her. So as a result of that, I don't have a problem with being sympathetic to her, because she's just the most unlucky person in the world as far as I can see.
And you're not concerned with facing that question, because you're confident in Lucy.
I am. I was not sure at first. I mean, look, nobody's sure.
Right.
But that's my belief. I mean, I also don't want to feel like I was in bed with Lucy, that it was overly sympathetic to her. Because I do feel like I asked her difficult questions, and I do feel like there were times when I felt a little bit, I probed a little bit, like, well, how do you know? Do you doubt yourself? Like, how do you have the certainty that you have? And, but yeah, I feel like mostly, I understand where a lot of that, that questioning comes from. But I think because I've spent so much time with her, and I've seen her so much and talk about it so much. And there was really, once I got to really know her, there was like no moment when I doubted her.
And to be fair, to be clear, this isn't your first rodeo. You've tackled sort of, controversial topics before. I'm trying to remember back to our previous conversation, if I recall some of the topics you covered in some of the documentary film work you did, and some, I don't believe this, but I think maybe even some could say even in season 1, there may have been a few controversial topics covered, so to speak.
I mean, I think this was my most challenging project. I haven't actually done something that was this challenging, where I really had to say to somebody to their face, like, there are people who don't believe you. What do you say to them? Like, that was very difficult for me. Right. I mean, it was hard, but she knows that. And you have, like, I said to her, like, I'm going to have to ask you some really difficult questions. And so she knew what she was getting into. I think I've struggled a lot in the past with, because I work on projects that are often over a long period of time. Like, I worked on a film that was a 10-year project, and almost every film that I've made has been made over a long period of time with repeated visits to the subjects. And there is something that is very tricky with documenting somebody's life and going in and asking them all these questions. And I mean, I've never read Janet Malcolm's book, The Journalist and the Murder or something. It's all about the sort of the seduction around journalism and how it's all very unethical. And I haven't read it because I feel like it's going to make me feel terrible. But I have always struggled with the line between friendship and work. And that very often, like, I made this film over 10 years that was about these 3 small businesses. And it was just, it was a very small portrait of these small struggling businesses. But to make the film, I had to kind of always go and hang out with the people and maintain the relationship. And so even when I wasn't filming, I would drop in to say hello, just to kind of remind people that I still existed. And the thing that I found very difficult was I didn't manage very well their understanding of the relationship. So I would go and, like, there's this old Polish guy who was a studio photographer, and I would go and I would sit with him on a Saturday and drink this really awful cold soup, and we'd hang out. And it's not up to him necessarily to notice that I'm asking him a lot of questions about his life, but I'm not necessarily sharing that much about my life. I'm in work mode, and it feels on his side maybe a bit like a friendship. And so when the film is over and I disappear, his reaction, understandably, was like, well, where did you go? You used to come and I used to look forward to our visits, and now you don't come at all. And there was a Korean woman, and she said the same thing. And I thought, like, oh, I messed this up, because they didn't really realize that I'm doing a job here.
Right.
And so I learned from that. And I think that I managed it a little bit better with Lucy, to always try to keep at in the foreground that I'm working and that I'm here for a reason. And I recently heard the Alex Kotlowitz interview on Longform, and he said that he always keeps his notebook out because he never wants people to forget why he's there.
Right.
And I thought, that is a genius move. I'm going to do that, because that's the problem, is that very, very often it just feels like you're hanging out, and the people, that's when they let their guard down and they are real people. And when you do things over a long period of time, that inevitably happens, but you don't want the person afterwards to feel like it was this artificial relationship that you just used them. That's when you feel like you've used somebody.
That's a legitimate downfall you would advise new documentary filmmakers or podcasters to keep at the forefront of their mind, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, I think that you are doing a job, and you're the one who's kind of going to carry their story into the world. And it's a big responsibility. And then it's the one weird feeling that I have right now is like the First Day Back season 2 story. It's like, oh, Tally's doing this thing. It's like my podcast, but it's Lucy's story. And so it must feel very strange to her that it lives in the world as if I did it, which I did. I mean, I produced this thing, but it's her life. I am carrying her story into the world. So it's a huge responsibility. You want to do it properly, but you don't want afterwards for them, the person, like, I don't want Lucy afterwards to feel like she was used.
All right, folks, let me interrupt this conversation just for a quick moment, tell you a little bit more about this week's show sponsor. My friends at Podbean are back, and I can't thank them enough for supporting the Podcast Digest. And I want to tell you about all the great new things going on over at Podbean. There are so many awesome things. So if you haven't heard me talk about Podbean before, what is it? They offer podcast hosting and monetization, a way to make money from your show. It's so many different features, all the stuff I've talked about before, right? You got the website and the integration to your own site if you've already got one, all the RSS and iTunes support, all that stuff that we've talked about before, the statistics, the online directory, but there's some neat new stuff going on, and they've launched a new integration with YouTube in addition to their Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, WordPress. They've even got several WordPress integrations that folks sometimes don't even think about. WordPress plugin, an auto share, all kinds of different features to work with WordPress as well. And now they're publishing to YouTube, which is a super cool feature as well. The Podcast Digest is on YouTube, and I do have listeners over there, and you should be on YouTube, folks, if you're not. And Podbean offers that service. And I've mentioned before their monetization features, right? And making money from your show. It's a thing. You can do it. Podbean can help you do it. They have a bunch of podcasters that are creating and selling premium content, right? So individual episodes or even subscriptions, or if you have a patron through their patron program, you can distribute episodes and content to only them as well. And that's included with all the accounts, the unlimited level or above. And it's one of the easiest ways to start making some revenue for folks that are participating in Podbean. I mean, Podbean's got so many different tools, guys, that it's worth checking out. Even if you already have a host and you're content with your host, hop on over, okay? Go to podbean.com/TPD. You'll learn more about some of the stuff I'm telling you about, and you'll get your first month for free if you decide to hop on over, okay? So you're not losing anything. A free month. Take a look at it. Take a look at the website. Take a look at some of the patron program, the monetization features. A lot going on there, and definitely worth your time in checking out. So again, podbean.com/TPD, 1 month for free, and you'll get a lot more information. My thanks once again to Podbean for supporting the Podcast Digest. Now, back to my conversation with Tally. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of parallels I can think with that, and I can think back to plenty of prior guests, whether it be, with Madeline Barron and In the Dark, and the same with the folks with Accused, or even in, the 2017, breakout with S-Town. Brian Reed, you mentioned Longform. When he was on Longform, I think he kind of talked a lot about, becoming, too close, or arguably too close to the subject, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting that is sort of a shared concern. When you talk about sort of Lucy's feeling on things during the process, did you sense that she wavered at all in getting this story told?
No, but I think that's the funny thing is also when you work on something over a long period of time, people lose sight of what you're doing. And so I remember another project, a film that I was working on for a year. I was filming these people so regularly. And at the end of it, we had a big screening in a cinema. And one of the people came up to me and said, "Why didn't you tell me you were going to make a movie with all this?" And I was like, I did tell you from the beginning. Why do you think I was there with a camera? But people feel like, I know news. I know how they make films. It doesn't take this long. Like, people just feel like it's very hard to see the end goal.
Right.
So even if, I'm sure Lucy thought to herself, like, why is this taking so long? I mean, I explained it, but it seems very abstract in the moment when you're in it to imagine like what it's going to be like at the end. When
did that start coming together for you in working with Lucy over these months?
Well, Mark and I started editing last summer, I think. Was that right? Yeah. So the summer of 2016. And that's why I saw her less, on vacation. I had vacation. So for me, that's when it's like, okay, well, this is what it could, episode 1 could be like this. And we had a couple meetings also with our executive producer, Dave Shaw. At one point, we were all in New York at the same time, and we had a big day-long brainstorm session of what each episode could be about, which we've now ripped apart several hundred times. And yeah, so last summer when we started to edit, that's when I started to picture like, okay, well, this is what this could be, and this is what this could be. And up until then, it's just this big pile of material that you don't know what to do with. It's pretty hard to, like I said, we had this big meeting, the three of us in New York, and we were trying to structure it all. We didn't even have everything. And when you're trying to structure, when you don't have all the material, it always ends up falling apart. So, yeah.
How much, if you had to put a number on it, how much raw tape did you think you have before you started this process?
Before I started the process, or how much do we?
Well, in the end, that became edited down to the 6-episode run.
Right. Mark would know how to answer this question.
Just an approximation. I just find it very illuminating for people who hear about
30
this.
hours, maybe?
Yeah.
30 hours, I think. Yeah, I would think so.
And in the end, folks are going to hear somewhere around 2 to 2.5, give or take.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just find that amazing in terms of, because that in and of itself, that represents literally hundreds of decisions that you guys are making in that editing room on what goes in and what doesn't make the cut.
Oh my God. So many little decisions. And I have a tweaker. I'm just constantly tweaking language and moments. And yeah, I cannot even believe what they did with S-Town, because I heard, what did they have, something like 150 hours of tape, or was it 100 hours? I don't know. It's a beast. Like it's very, very hard to, especially the other part of it is making a serialized story out of something, because we also had often good material, or Lucy would say something and like, oh, that could be really interesting, but like, where do you fit it in? It doesn't fit in the structure.
Right.
And so you can't just randomly have her talking about something really interesting without building up to it or without it fitting in. Or so that was my big problem, is like, if we were leaving something because it didn't entirely work, I would feel like if it's objectively good material, I would have a really hard time letting go of it. And I'm always trying to sneak it in here, sneak it in there, like trying to make stuff. I mean, it's kind of a joke by the end of it, because there's some bits of tape that I've tried to put in so many different places. And my producers, when they'd hear it, they'd be like, oh, you put that there. You're still trying with that little piece of that. I'm like, well, maybe here.
It would sound like to me that it would have taken a lot of discipline to maintain sort of the focus, because the idea, first day back, you're trying to chronicle the journey back, but it would seem like there are so many different elements that you could very easily have been its own podcast with a different topic, maybe something more legal focused or something more, whatever. And it would be easy to kind of sidetrack into some of these other areas.
Well, I would say we let ourselves be guided by the tape in that area. So if something, we did follow a lot of avenues that didn't end up being interesting, or there were a lot of scenes that, often that I thought were interesting, but there just wasn't a way to fit them in. We had some rituals, like Lucy and I would always go to this park, and we would go and look at the water level in this river. And I was desperate to like fit this in somehow, but we haven't managed to fit it in. Like it's these nice moments, but they just didn't work in the whole. So I would say you just you let yourself be guided by what's good.
So
that's the starting point anyway. And then like where to fit it in.
So let's talk about when you're going through this process. Obviously it began in the summer. I'm assuming it ran into the fall, and in terms of nailing down the narrative and packaging it into episodes and editing and so on and so forth. Talk about the process of deciding on release, because I've seen a lot of shows take the approach where, okay, episode 1's ready, we're going to put it out, and we'll just keep working on the rest. Because there had to be some level of temptation to go earlier than ready. What's that conversation like?
Well, we initially thought we'd be ready with all of them ready in November of 2016, and then we just kept editing, and then when something's not baked, it's not baked. Like we would listen to it and be like, oh, it's not quite there. And we kept pushing it and pushing it. We pretty early on got some very good advice to not be working, to try to finish them as best we could before the release. And that we were going to make ourselves insane if we were editing and releasing at the same time. So that's, they're not all completely done, and the musician is still working on stuff right now that has not been completed, because we ran very late with our editing, with our side of things, so we didn't hand stuff to him as early as we should have. Like, it's not his fault, it's our fault. But yeah, we were mostly done. We were mostly in good shape, and I think that I don't know. We would have survived. And
obviously, that means that Scripps, Stitcher, etc. were supportive.
So supportive. I was completely blown away by how supportive they were. I mean, very early on, I think right after we decided to work together, I don't know if I should say this, but I think I can say this. I was told, if we release an episode in 2016, great. If not, 2017 is fine.
Right. And
to me, that really showed a belief in the process and a respect for the work. We don't know where the story's going to end up, and we're not just going to try to push this out no matter what. And that to me was when I felt like, okay, I'm in the right place. These people understand what I'm trying to do.
And
that's what I like to do.
The reason I asked that is because and I'm not going to throw any particular organization under the bus, but from speaking to as many people as I've spoke to over these last 2.5 years of interviews, that's not always the same story with every group.
No, that's what I mean. Like, I don't think that's usual. So, and I think, I remember a conversation with Mark where I said, like, this might take time. And he said, like, you're talking to people at a bureau where I can't even remember exactly, but he gave an example of like some big investigative piece that Scripps had just done that was, took like over a year to report on. And he said, like, we're used to that kind of thing. And so that was like the best thing anybody could have said to me. I mean, I could also probably fall on the other side of it with like, I could have taken too long. And it was probably good at some point that they say like, okay, well, let's start editing.
Right.
Because I would be like, well, I don't know. Like, do we really have this story? Like, it's kind of a safety to just keep recording because you don't know. Maybe something better is going to come up. But at a certain point, you have to pull the trigger. And I told myself I wouldn't use any gun metaphors.
This is a new rule. No gun metaphors.
Accidentally happened.
Especially not during season 2. Okay.
No.
That's all right. It was an accident.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We got in our first day back jokes. So
yeah.
So as it's coming together and as you're looking at it and sitting back now, we will caveat of course you listen and you can hear errors and where it could be better. But generally speaking, are you pretty content with how this is all coming together?
Yeah, generally speaking. And yes, I can hear all the things that we could have done better. I mean, it's very hard to have any distance. Like I could probably, what's the word? Like recount. I could probably perform the scripts of them verbatim, like because I know them so well, that I really have no critical distance, but I'm getting really good feedback and the response has been very positive. So I'm just kind of hanging on to that because it's really hard for me to tell.
I meant to ask, was it a little different when you said scripts? It reminded me, was it a little different this time with the narration? Because I know you wrote and I know you did narration for season 1, but even when you were doing that, it was such a personal story. You the writing probably just guided you. But in this, it was probably, much more quote unquote scripted in that. What was that a different experience?
Well, they were very much like, it has to be in your voice. And when we would write something and if Mark would say, well, why don't you say it like this? And they would say like, if you would say it that way, but if you wouldn't say it that way, say it the way that you would say it. Like it has to be, it's my voice and it's my words. But it's funny because I listened to a little moment of season 1 recently and I was like, God, it sounds so read. Like the performance of the narration is really dry. Is that the word? Like it was just stiff. That's the word I was looking for. I was speaking to somebody for like 2 hours in French earlier. And so my brain sometimes doesn't do the switch back and forth very well.
I think, and I'm trying to think back because it has been a little while since I've heard season 1 myself, but if I remember correctly, more of your talking when you were talking in season 1 was just you in a conversation. There were narration bits, beginning and throughout. But when I think about you talking, I think more about your dialogue than your narration, if that makes sense. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And that obviously didn't sound scripted,
right.
Your regular dialogue.
No, and conversation with people. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I speak the way I speak. And there are moments in conversation with Lucy where I think I just sound the way I sound.
Right.
Yeah, no, and there's, I guess that's true. There's way more narration in season 2.
For what it's worth, I love your narration. I think I love the way you're presenting the story, and I personally like, how you're doing the narration, and it's because in what little bit I've heard at this point in the process, you could have. It's sort of going back to some of the early questions I was asking you in terms of sort of. I don't want to say passing judgment or anything of that nature, but you don't go way off into one direction. You ask the questions or you pose the questions to tackle, but you're not necessarily doing it in an overt pendulum style to one side or the other. You know what I mean? And I think
interesting.
I think that's important for the story because I think it gives you a believability, as you're kind of guiding people through this journey that Lucy's on. So, you mentioned the feedback and the reception. How has this been different, let's say, from season 1 in terms of what the first few episodes out in the wild feel like?
Yeah, I mean, when I say feedback, like it's mostly friends and family, but but people have written and there've been some reviews. I think people are surprised very often by the story that it was such a 180 from season 1.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also been interesting because a lot of people are now going back or going to season 1 for the first time.
Right.
And so there's 2 streams of feedback. There's like the mom stream where people are like, I'm going through the same thing as you are in season 1. I relate so much to this. And then there's the season 2 where people are like, oh my God, this story is insane. So yeah, the feedback has been really good. And I think people are intrigued by Lucy. And they're super intrigued by her story, which, yeah, I mean, I get it because once we started to dig into like, you've done the worst thing that you could possibly imagine and you don't remember it. I mean, there's a lot there to unpack.
Here's a question from left field that just hit me. This is going to be ridiculous, but I just want to see if it kind of jogs anything because when we're talking about the 2 stories, being as involved, obviously, in season 2, your show, narration, doing all the interviews, all that stuff, and obviously being the central focus of season 1, are there any through lines between the 2 in terms of the first day back journey? Or is it just totally different?
I joked so often that prison is a different kind of maternity leave.
Well,
Sorry, I had that even the wrong way. Maternity leave is a different kind of prison. No. Are there parallels?
The only thing I can think of is wanting to regain pieces of a prior life.
I think that's the first day back theme. Like you're trying. I think if you didn't want to go to the back part of the first day back, then it wouldn't be a first day back. It would just be like moving on to something else.
Right.
So the piece of the puzzle that is similar is like, trying to figure out where do you fit in the world when you don't feel like you're the same person and most of your life is the same, or in Lucy's case, most of her life is not the same. Like she is one person. She's this island that is in the universe and she has her family, but otherwise she really literally has nothing from her old life. She doesn't have her stuff. She doesn't have her house. She doesn't have the person who she spent most of her days with. She doesn't have her job. So for her, it's just the most extreme version of a first day back. But she feels, in her case, she feels like the same person and a different person, I would say. But I think that's the universal part of a first day back, or like a comeback, is that you're trying to get back to something that you had before.
It's amazing that even in 2 wildly different tales of an experience that you can still find, the ever tiniest bit of common ground. Yeah. It's amazing. And it's funny, and we're sitting here talking about this, and I don't know. I almost feel like going back and checking now. I don't know if it was on our first conversation tally or something we said offline before or after the recording, but I remember thinking, and I think saying to you, I just don't remember if it was recorded or not, something about the idea of first day back could apply to so many different things. And I don't think I thought or even said prison, but I remember thinking how it could have this application in so many other different ways. And wow, with season 2, did you ever land on a completely different application, yet one that still fits that theme so well?
I know. I mean, I've thought there've been so many things that I've seen that I've thought like, oh, that's a first day backstory. Did you see that documentary Tig about Tig Notaro?
I know I saw the stand-up special. I don't know if I saw the documentary.
Yeah, there's a documentary that follows her. Like she had that sort of breakout comedy club night where she performed on stage and told everybody that she had breast cancer.
Right.
And then, and it kind of, it went crazy on social media, and she was on all the late night talk shows, and it was just this huge, huge thing. And then she went through breast cancer treatment and radiation, et cetera, and had really fragile health, and then decided that she wanted to get back on stage, but she felt like she had this, the elephant in the room was that she had done the best show of her life with the cancer performance. And so the film kind of follows her as she tries to prepare to get back on stage. And I thought, like, that's such a great story. It's such a first day back. Or there was I read an article there was an article in the New York Times that just won the Pulitzer. It was the New York Times Magazine about a soldier coming back from Iraq. And it was gutting. It was just so heart-wrenching about how he just was not the same person anymore. And he had this journal, and it was a first day backstory. Like there's so many situations in our lives when we're trying to get back to it. And I'm not necessarily completely obsessed with the theme. It's just a prism through which to tell these stories. And it's like a way that you can tell all these different stories. It's an entry point kind of thing. But it goes, it ends up being a really wide prism, wide lens through which to see things.
That's for sure. And a lot of applicability. You're right. There's so many different stories that we see out there so often that, this could apply to. And it starts to beg the obvious question. I mean, it sounds like you're generating ideas for season 3 already, Tally.
I hope so. It's really early.
I was going to say, we're not even talking about season 3 yet.
I'm not even, I still have the same list that I had before. Right. I would love to do a military story. I would love to do a sports story. But sports story is tricky. The stakes have to be stakes. Like, it can't just be a part-time athlete or like a college athlete, or unless it's a college athlete with a lot on the line. I think there must be an interesting story to do about like gender reassignment surgery.
Sure. Yeah.
There are tons there's so many.
Oh, it makes me think that really, if you ever really want to I don't know, this could be playing with fire in terms of how it might end up on the sad side of things, but I'm just thinking to myself, you could probably walk the halls of a children's hospital, and get an amazing story out of it in the sense of, a kid beating something terrible and coming back to whatever. But
then that's the problem. Like, it's not the problem, but it's for me as a human being, like, oh my God, you have to get them when they're on the edge. Like, you have to get them when you're not sure yet if it's going to be so. And
that would be terrible if it didn't turn out well.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a person, I don't know.
Well, I don't know if somebody like, I already lost the name, just jumped out of my head because I had it wrong. I don't know, a suspended athlete or something like that, who came back, but I don't know. It definitely
disgraced athlete.
There you go. Yeah, that type of thing. Wait.
Yeah.
Go positive. Serena's pregnant with her first kid, so after she comes back, you could go back to the maternity leave story and start working with Serena. Come on.
Yeah, alternate themes. Go.
Yeah, but this one would be with Serena. I mean, that would be amazing.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, really recently there was. We were joking like Barack Obama is having a first day back.
There you go. Hey. Yeah. Go right for that. Yeah, I tweeted about that today, and I said, hey, he does this interview conversation thing pretty well. Maybe he should start a podcast. And then I could reach out to interview him. Hey. Well, if folks want to get on the first day back train, if they want to be one of those people who not only want to get on season 2, but also go back and listen to season 1 because for some reason they didn't do it already, how do they go about doing so?
Well, it's all on the website, firstdaybackpodcast.com. It's in iTunes. It's in Stitcher. It's everywhere. It's wherever you listen to podcasts.
And it's in the show notes. There is a link in the show notes as well, folks. And people can find you on the socials.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I'm always nervous about people like wanting to get into season 2 and being confused. And we've tried to kind of label them well, the same way that we use the kind of startup naming nomenclature model. So the name of the season is in parentheses at the end of the title. So if you're looking for the story of Lucy, it's season 2. If you're looking for the story of Tally, it's season 1.
Look, if you're just coming, folks, don't even play around, okay? Hit subscribe, go all the way back to the beginning, and just start listening. If for nothing else, listen, the Mother's Day episode in between, I will call it the in between 1 and 2 episode, is one of the best things you will ever hear. And Mother's Day is coming up this month, folks. So perfect time to start from the beginning, listen all the way through, and catch that one in between the 2 seasons. Trust me, it's worth it.
Thank you.
I loved that one. That was just...
Oh,
that was one of my favorite pieces of audio when you put that out there. That was 16, if I remember correctly.
It must be, yeah.
That was the one you jumped in. That came out May 8th, 2016.
Yeah.
Tomorrow's a year from the time this episode comes out. That one was out. It was awesome. So it was all of it is
personal.
Great. So yes. So anyways, Tally Abecassis, thank you for returning to the Podcast Digest. And
thank you so much, Dan.
And maybe we'll have to do this again for season 3. Just saying.
Maybe.
Thanks again, Tally.
Thank you.
And folks, that'll do it for this week's show. Episode 141 is in the can. What'd you guys think? Let me know what you think. Go on Facebook, go on Twitter, go wherever you go. Use hashtag TPD. Talk about the show. Tell me what you thought. Subscribe to First Day Back. Tweet at Tally. Let her know that you're loving her show as well. She's a great audio producer and storyteller, and I really think that you will enjoy First Day Back if you've not already checked it out. So tell your friends, folks, the Podcast Digest place to be to go behind the scenes of your favorite shows and the people who make them. So talk about it. Follow me on Twitter at Pod Digest. That is the #1 place where I'm at almost all the time. I'll talk about the show, talk about my guests, talk about my experience, and also tweet a lot of animal pictures and puppies and stuff. I promise. Before I go, I want to take a moment and thank once again this week's show sponsor is Podbean. Podbean is a great supporter of the Podcast Digest, and I can't thank them enough. Don't forget to go to podbean.com/TPD. If you're thinking of starting a podcast or looking for a new home for your existing show, you'll get your first month for free if you sign up with podbean.com/TPD. It'll let them know that you came from here, and I would appreciate that as well. That'll do it, folks. Episode 141 is done. 142 is coming your way. Let me know, folks. Shoot me an email, thepodcastdigest@gmail.com, who I should be talking to, who I should be interviewing, what shows you want to go behind the scenes of, or talk to me on Twitter. Use hashtag TPD, @me @PodDigest. Until next week, folks, my name's Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.